I want to call the meeting to order. Let's start with the Pledge of Allegiance, please. Liberty, justice. Roll call.
Mr. Bordenaro,
Here.
Mr. Grady, Mr. Miller, Mr. Rodriguez, Mr. Holmes, Mr. Paradis.
For those who don't know me, I'm Sal Bordenaro. I'm the chairman of the Board of Finance. I appreciate everyone that came here out of the cold. I'm sure a lot of people didn't want to come out. But I want to thank you for everyone that's here and everyone that's on Zoom. We went into this budget cycle keeping in mind that everybody is struggling, with gas price, higher gas prices, higher heating prices, higher food prices, just to name a few. I would like to have a zero tax increase for the third consecutive year, but the town and the Board of Education have also been impacted by these inflationary costs, along with having to meet contractual obligations. Board of Finance was given a proposed budget that would increase the tax rate by 5.8%. In collaboration with the town and the Board of Education leadership, we found areas we could reduce expenses and increase revenues without impacting the quality of service that the town and the Board of Education provide. The result is a 1.1% tax increase compared to the 5.8 proposed. A projected budget surplus for the current year allowed us to cover 1.1 million of capital projects and equipment included in the proposed budget. The Board of Finance unanimously voted to give the Board of Education a 2.5% budget increase. They requested a 4.7% increase. I believe that the Board of Education can meet their contractual requirements, not impact any programs, and with the use of COVID grant monies, help pay for resources to deal with student learning loss throughout the pandemic. Education in Berlin has been adequately funded with annual budget increases despite a drop in student enrollment. Berlin education expenses are 60.2% of the total expense budget, with the town at 39.8%. Berlin's per pupil expenditure in comparison to 6 similar nearby towns is the second highest, with Glastonbury being the highest. The other towns include Newington, Farmington, Wethersfield, Rocky Hill, and Cromwell. One other area that you should be aware of: every year when you receive your motor vehicle tax bill, the value of the vehicle normally goes down, but unfortunately not this year. Supply chain issues combined with inflation is driving up the value of vehicles. So we're looking at a book value increase on automobiles of 18%. So even without a tax increase, you will pay more taxes on your vehicle than last year. Every town is having to deal with this. Now, Governor Lamont is trying to establish a mill rate cap on the motor vehicle tax, but which could help reduce your motor vehicle tax. The grand list grew 2.9% in this proposed budget, with a portion of that growth attributed to the motor vehicle book value increase. As we complete our major building projects and tax abatements drop off, grand list tax revenues will continue to grow. That increase, along with continuing to reduce our debt, will provide more financial flexibility in the future. I want to thank the town manager, Rosha. I can't pronounce your last name, so I won't destroy it. The town finance director, Kevin Delaney, school superintendent, Brian Benigni, Board of Education chair, Julia Dennis, Board of Education finance director, Ashley Dorsey, for working with the Board of Finance and helping us develop what we believe is a fair budget. I also want to thank Mayor Mark Kaczynski and the town council for their guidance. Finally, I want to thank the Board of Finance members for their efforts. With that, I'll turn it over to Roche for the town budget presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Bordenaro, and good afternoon, everyone. So before I get started, I know there's crowded people in the virtual world. And I'm going to imagine there's an invisible audience here that I can't see and the image back. So I am going to introduce the town department heads who are here, the team, because that's important that people know them. They are the ones who actually make the wheels turn, make things happen in the town. Start with Kevin Delaney, who's our finance director, keeps everyone out of hot water, make sure we comply with all our financial regulations and everyone stays on the budget. Has worked for the last so many years. Under his leadership, we also got a AAA bond rating with all of the work that we have done over the years. Gail Erickson is here, Assistant Director of Finance. Doug Solak, Facilities Director, has a huge responsibility managing a lot of town buildings, the schools, all the public buildings that are out there. Mike Ahern, Director of Public Works. You think of public works, roads and bridges, but water, sewer, snow plowing, you name it, he's got all the works. I say he has a fun job in town. The Chief Engineer, Director of Public Works. And Chris Edge, Economic Development Director, single-handedly working on over 30-something ribbon cutting since the pandemic. We have you here. And I see our town clerk. Everybody knows her, Kate Ball. She's not only the town clerk, she's also the president of the Town Clerks Association of Connecticut. So most of you know Brian Benigni, who will speak to you after I finish the town budget. But I also want you to everyone to meet Matt McNally, Chief McNally, who just joined us a few months ago. I say just, but it seems like you've been here for a long time. So welcome. So what I'm going to do is talk about the town budget. And then, first of all, in one page, I'll give you what we are proposing. That will have all the information that you need to know, what the budget is, what the mill rate is. And we'll talk about how we got there with the working collaboratively with the Board of Finance, how we're going to pay for it. And then I'll talk about the increases in the town for fiscal year 2023, the proposed increases, and Brian will talk about the Board of Ed budget after that. With that, whoops. Maybe
Shouldn't be. There you go.
all right. I'll let you do that. I'll give you something. So this is the budget that we are proposing. Total of 96,625,778. That's the entire budget, and it's 0.38 increase in the mill rate. We'll take it from 33.93, which we have had for the last 3 years almost, and then to 34.31. Big picture, about half of the budget that we have is for the Board of Ed, and which you will hear more about that later. And the general government, which includes everything from public works to town planning to police, town manager, town clerk, economic development, every department under the library, community center, everything comes under general government. That's about 35% of the budget. And then we have something called debt service, long-term liabilities, that debt that we have had on our books. The good news is from 2016, an all-time high of 107 million, we are down to about 74.6. That's really impressive what the town has accomplished over the last few years. However, we're still around 8% of all total operations go towards debt service. Ideal range should be around 3 to 5%, but we're getting there. And then we also have a section called General Government Expenses for the Board of Ed. We pay managing the public, the buildings, the 5 schools that we have, electricity, things like ground maintenance, all the liability insurance, they're all paid out of a central budget, and that's about another $4.9 million or so for the Board of Ed. All right. So in general, 2.8 increase over last year, but for the Board of Ed, it's a 2.5% increase, and for the town, it's a 3.2. Mr. Bernard mentioned before, when we submitted the budget, the Board of Ed had about a 4.7 increase from last year. It's down to 2.5, and the town had about a 7% increase, and it's down to 3.2 now. So in a snapshot, this is what we have. Big picture of the adjustments that were made by the Board of Finance. On the expenditure side, we removed capital expenses out of fiscal year 2023, and it's about 1.132. The reason for that is currently we are proposed expecting a surplus in fiscal year 2022. We're projecting a surplus, and we believe before the end of the year, we could take some of these funds and address the capital needs that were out there. They largely had to do with infrastructure improvements in IT, server replacements, things that have not been done in many years, carpet replacement for the library. Told the carpeting came with the original building. It's time to change that. Repairs to pools, Hubbard playground, Willard fire alarm system. These are things that are, due at now, and we think we can still address it with this plan. In addition to that, we also moved some general expenses out of the government budget. The big part of it was there was a proposal to hire 2 more police officers. Right now, there is a backlog in the training and the academy and getting the police officers in. There's an understanding with the council and the Board of Finance. Whenever that is open or available, we'll work together to try to find the money even mid-year to try and hire the 2 police officers. We reduced a lot of part-time help that we had proposed in the town budget. Part-time help to get certain things that we never get to address, like moving certain things into electronic media. And then we had projected legal expenses at a higher rate, and we believe we can reduce it further down. We made that change, and we had anticipated some high expenses in public grounds and public buildings for contracted services. We reduced that number. There was also some money that we set aside for marketing and advertising for economic development to brand the town. We still have that money, but we reduced it a little bit. So, I want to stress this. Another item that I want to talk about is the trash removal, refuse removal. We were anticipating a high number. We reduced that one as well. None of these budgets are going below what we had last year. Same for the town and the Board of Ed. The reduction is from the proposed increase. So you saw that in the first page. We still have an increase from this year to the fiscal year 2023. The other one that we did was to make some adjustments with the revenues and the receipts. And that's what you see on the right-hand side. Part of how we're going to fund this year's budget is to take some money from the fund balance. These are savings that we have accrued over time. And we have a healthy fund balance. We can take a small amount, like $380,000 to do that. ARPA funds are the American Rescue Plan Act. We got over $6 million from the federal government. We earmarked about $720 last year for the last year's budget. And we have right now tentatively thinking about setting aside $5 million to do some of the HVAC work in the elementary schools. That's not approved, but that's what we are thinking. So I think we can take $300,000 and we'll accomplish most of what we need to do in the elementary schools. The others were we've had budgeted conservatively. The town clerk revenue line, marriage license, death certificate, dog licenses, everything else that, Kate brings in. I think we can bring in a little bit more in that. And same with, we've been seeing an increase in back tax collections. I think we'll be able to make that target as well. And the supplemental motor vehicle, we've been a conservative number there. We're up that one. And then with all of the developments that are going, Berlin Turnpike and other housing projects, and the residents, the work that's been done for permitting, we believe we can get about another $75,000 more. So between the 2.8 or so, I did talk about the Board of Ed operating expense reduction of $1,040,000. Mr. Benigni will address that. $2.8 million in expenditure reductions and $1,050,000 in changes to receipts over $3.8 million. So that is what we had to do to get to that number that we are proposing. So how do we pay for this? The big economic engine is the grand list, right? For most towns. And the town's current grand list is around $2.4 billion. That's a 2.9% increase over last year, almost 3%. It's pretty darn healthy, I would say. We need to do better. About 60% of that comes from motor vehicle market value changes, 25% from real estate, and about 15% from personal property. And that additional 2.9% generated about $2.3 million in new revenues. And that's about 0.9 of a mil, almost a mil. If not for that, that would also have to be, financed some other way. So we're pleased with that, but this is something that we continue to work each year to try and improve or increase our grant list. And I'll talk to that a little bit later in terms of the investments that we are making to make that happen. We looked at the pie chart with the expenses, the revenues, the big blue one that you see, that's almost 90%. 90% of our revenues come from taxes. Real estate, personal property, that's the biggest chunk. About 4% from fee for service, anything from Parks and Rec to Timberland Golf to the fees that I talked about in the building department, town clerk's office. All those fees that we bring in adds to about 4%. And then there's the state education grant, which is about 5.9%, almost 6% of our operations. All the other pieces are relatively small. So one of the things that we are good at is the collection rate. We collect almost 100%, 99.3% of our taxes are collected each year. That's pretty darn good. We have a good, healthy collection rate here that we can count on. It's been fairly steady over the last few years. And the education grant that we talked about, it's flat from fiscal year 2022. And these other changes that I talked about, the Board of Finance changes, I already addressed them, but it's listed here as revenue components for this year's pie chart as well. Right. So let's dig into the general government. So in order to provide the services that the residents expect to grow the economic, the grand list and to manage the town's debt and all that, there are 4 pillars that we focus each year, main pillars. I think that's important to any town, but it's more so important to, you all know, you're only as good as your good education system that you have in the town. Every time a family wants to move into a town, one of the first things they'll look at is how good are the schools here. So we can be proud that we have great schools in Berlin, and we continue to invest in that. Public safety is way up there. You don't want to move into an area where you don't feel safe, and Berlin is a safe community, and we continue to evaluate that and invest in those areas each year. Infrastructure is critical. Roads, bridges, not only that, water, sewer, And all these buildings that we have, they have to be maintained, school buildings, public buildings, grounds, all of that. And that is a big part of our investment strategy. And how do we do all this in a financially responsible manner? We have continued to generate, break even or generate surpluses and invested it back into capital improvements and one-time expenses. In addition to that, I mentioned before, we have a real good bond rating, AAA bond rating from Standard & Poor's, and that tells good about it's not a one-year success story to tell. It's continuous improvement and sustainability. So these are the pillars that we discussed. And specific to this year, I want to talk about some projects that we are doing. I talked about the ARPA funds, the American Rescue Plan. A big part of that, we need to replace or renovate all the HVAC systems in the elementary schools. We're going to start with one. And then based on the pricing and what we find out during that project, we'll do more. The Percival Field will be done this year. And we were planning to do it last year, but we needed to tighten up, what we were going to do and do a little bit more research and secure the funding. That's in place. And there's a lot of work that gets done each year with roads and bridges, but this year you're going to see the Deming Road, Porter's Pass, Christian Lane, that whole intersection will get done this year. That's a big project for the town. In addition to that, if things go well, we will also replace the Kensington Road Bridge. That's right up here before the post office. And that will happen this year as well. Okay. Operating personnel. We have added a new dispatcher. The reason for that, we didn't have a supervisor in the police dispatch. It was reporting to the internet. And we will promote someone from within to that rank as a supervisor and hire another dispatch so that it can work more smoothly. We made some changes in the DNA. There was no real supervision or a coordinator to manage the school nurses. It all reported to the VNA. With the restructuring of the VNA, we felt like it was critical that you had someone who could manage the school nurses, provide the necessary training for them, address any scheduling needs they had, and we are proposing that for this year's budget. And then for many years, we have had an human resources director that was split between the town and the Board of Ed, 40-60 of the salary. And we're making a change this year because this and the next two positions have come to a point that it is what I call unsustainable. Town has grown, responsibility has grown, compliance issues have grown, and town is growing. It's a good thing, but it has come to a point that one person can manage all of that. So the current HR director is going to move to the Board of Ed as a 0.8 FTE from a 0.6. And then the town will hire the HR director for the town staff to manage all of the hiring, the required training, the compliance issues, dealing with all of the unions, arbitration negotiations, healthcare providers, all other benefit providers. And it has escalated, especially during COVID, in terms of what special requirements that are needed to go through the obligations of that job. The other one is the assistant planner. I call that office right now a bottleneck, not because of the staff that's in there, but the amount of workload and demands that are placed on just one person. The current planner staffs 4 different commissions now: Planning and Zoning Commission, the ZBA, the Historic District, and there's another one that I'm missing out on, Conservation Commission. So what we want to do is to hire an assistant planner so that we can be a little bit more proactive in how we go about the planning office. We don't wait until somebody gets into our office. There are a lot of regulations that require updated to be upgraded based on new mandates coming from the state, whether it's land use or it's cannabis. We tend to wait until somebody actually files an application, and it's a longer process, and that's not a really good way to attract people to come and do business in town. So we're hoping that this new position, we can get ahead of all this, and whenever new regulations come up, we can actually update our own regulations and be ready to roll with certain things. Same with the facilities superintendent position. We currently have a director who is also the superintendent, who is also the project manager, who also manages capital projects, planning, operations, everything. It's a heavy burden on one person. And no matter how good you are, there's only 24 hours during the day, 7 days a week, and certain things get to the back burner. So those are the positions that from the town end that we are proposing in this year's budget. And then from the economic development, there are a lot of things going on, but most of you have seen the progress that's being made next to the train station. There'll be over 70 apartment units. It's a mixed use. There's residential and commercial. The first building is almost done. They'll hopefully have an opening by the summer latest. And then there's a Turnpike Bridge. That's the development behind the Acura dealer. About 72 residential units are planned to go out there. In addition, the retail building, the second one is complete and it's almost fully occupied. And there's another one called Deming Ridge with 88 units coming out. There's another development a little bit behind, which is the 404 building, Turnpike in Lobster. The grand plan is to have a residential units, commercial, medical, hospital, medical offices, as well as a hotel. But it's I don't think that build happen this year. There's still more work to be done there. But a lot of exciting things happening in the economic development area. So I want to give you this is a recap on the numbers of what I talked about. The new positions is about 805,000. The split between wages and fringes. 5 full-time, 7 part-time. Let's talk about the 7 part-time. I've got 7. All 7 of them were working during the summer. These positions were there, but we are expanding the time frame to a 9-month period. So the 5 of them, especially at the Timberland Golf Course, it's here, but it doesn't impact the mill rate or the taxes. The Timberland pays for their own expenses. So they'll be paid for by what we charge the golfers. Say the 2 other part-timers are public grounds. Same, we have so much demand now in our playing fields and playgrounds, and especially during the summer months when it's active, 7 days a week to try and maintain all those facilities. So we are upping it from a summer positions to more of a 9-month position. Okay. We talked about the HR director, assistant planner, dispatcher, facilities, and the school nurse. I do want to stress, it shows like a big number here, but over the last couple of years, we have also eliminated some positions. So for example, we eliminated a position in Timberland Golf, the director's position. We combined the VNA administrator and the clinical supervisor. We also reduced 2.5 FTEs in the VNA, but they have been in previous years, so it's you don't see the savings in this year. So existing positions, these are standard merit increases and step increases for existing staff. Big part of the benefits this year, they're driven by health insurance. It's predicted to go up by 10% for fiscal year 2023. And this operating cost this is probably you're seeing the same thing in your own personal life too. Insurance costs are going up, liability, property, but the big one is cybersecurity. No matter whether you're in a private company or public sector or non-profit, you have seen a lot of these cyber attacks, and cyber insurance is getting really expensive. So we have increased the insurance for that. Fuel for the town vehicles. Last year, we were looking at a little bit over $2 a gallon. It's last time I looked now, it's over $4 a gallon. And so planning for that. Computer support has to do with a lot of the upgrades in the police, aging equipment that needs upgraded. And then all of the cost down about 10,000. Capital is down 370. This is remember, this is a comparison from last year to this year. Last year we had about 370. This year we removed everything out of the budget with the understanding we're going to fund it with some surplus money that we have. Good news, the debt service has been coming down. So down to 217, less than what we paid last year. And we need to pay a little bit more. 2023 is the year of the POCD, Plan of Conservation and Development, and we've been transferring money to fund that, and we needed $10,000 more for that plan. I think this is a good snapshot of the outstanding debt. I think everyone here, town, Board of Ed, Board of Finance, Council worked really hard to hold the line on these things and pay down the debt. It's a good story to tell. We're down to about 74.6, still high, but going the right direction. And we have, as of now, no plans to borrow for this year, but based on the needs, that might change. Okay. So that's a summary: education, community service, public safety, infrastructure, all that together 34.31 and 34.39. We talk about that. I missed it last time. So I think Mr. Bordenauer talked about the motor vehicle cap. State is working on capping the motor vehicle rate at $29. So the idea is for them to make towns whole for the difference. Unfortunately, well, it's not unfortunately, it's the timing work. The grand list number that they use for the motor vehicles are from 2020. So that might leave a slight increase. So the 34.31 might end up being 34.39, 0.08 in case we have the state won't, make us whole 100%. So that's what we are looking at in terms of the bill rate. And finally, I want to talk about very quickly the enterprise fund that we have, water and sewer. It funds all the mill rate. It's the self-sustaining fund. The slight increase there, a 2.1% increase for water and sewer. There are some capital needs that requirements we have to address sooner than later. The Deming Road pump station needs to be replaced. That's about a $3.2 million, and part of it, about 70%. We are hoping that we could partner with MDC. We are also put our name in the pipeline with the state for some bonding money. And on the Berlin Turnpike, we had to replace our enlarged pipes. That's about another $2 million number that we ought to be doing in the next couple of years. And in East Berlin, there are continuous water line updates that we need to do, and plan to address some of it this year as well. Just to give you a sense of the timing of the budget, before I turn it over to Brian, we have another hearing today at 7 o'clock at the Berlin High School. After that, hopefully the Board of Finance will vote to recommend the budget to the council. Council will take the budget on April 5th, the following Tuesday. And these are the options they have. They can approve the Board of Finance recommended budget as is, and it goes to referendum. They can approve the Board of Finance budget recommended with some reductions, and then reject it, in which case it'll go back to a joint meeting of the council and the Board of Finance. And the budget referendum is set for April 26th. So with that, would you like to take questions now or wait till the end? Great. So please hold off your questions. I'll turn it over to Brian and we'll take questions after that. Thank you.
Thank you, Arush. Those of you who don't know me, my name is Brian Bickney. I'm the superintendent of schools. This is my 29th year in the Berlin Public Schools. Started as a teacher 29 years ago. First slide. A little bit about how the Board of Education budget is designed with goals. Our position is to continue to provide the quality education to all students at the standard that Berlin parents come to expect. That means that we'd like to give you the same education that's been the pride of Berlin for years. Provide all students with an education that prepares them for a multitude of options and opportunities upon graduation. Looking at the good education system as not solely for college, that students have multiple options when they graduate. In order for this to be accomplished, we have to provide a comprehensive curriculum that does not shortchange staff or programs that are offered. Maintain favorable class sizes and adequate course offerings. Again, the class size at the elementary level is pivotal for the education as well as what parents come to expect. Many of the parents in town also are educated in Berlin and like to see class sizes remain as they've been in the past. Consistent support for technology use with adequate funding for hardware, software, and infrastructure, IT support. As you know, the last 2+ years, without the appropriate technology and infrastructure, we would not have been as competitive as we were. That technology is vital for what students need in the future, as well as for staff to have that technology. An ongoing commitment to implementing safety measures, equipment, and systems that provide students and staff with safe learning environments. So taking those into account, when we design the budget, those are things that we want to maintain throughout the budget. Difficult to see from there, we have a copy of it. We use a stacked bar graph to represent both budgets. So the first budget is one that my budget, as well as the one that was approved by the Board of Education. Then we had a 2.17% reduction to 2.5%. And so the stack bar graph changed a little bit. And some positions I'll go through that we're going to cut to get to this reduction. The blue portion represents the contractual services. And those are the contracts of the staff, the current staff in place that we have this year. And then the next stack bar graph would be what staff are in place moving forward with the reduction. So as you can see, the blue stack bar graph has decreased from one to the other. So there are positions that will be reduced for the next year's budget. The other pieces that we really couldn't work at, the tuition, and you'll see that many of the other items have maintained the same. One part is supplies, textbooks. That part is totally been removed because we cut that from the budget, so you won't see the purple. We've pulled it in with the other because it's so small, we really couldn't represent it. But I think you can see that the $1 million decrease, how the whole bar is shrinking, and then where it's shrinking based on each part of the stack bar. Looking at the next slide, same stack bar graph that was on the right. These are the categories or things we'll be cutting to achieve that $1,040,000 reduction. The first would be an administrative salary. That's one administrative salary that we will be reducing for the next year. That position there is the assistant superintendent of schools. They will not have an assistant superintendent next year of school. Certified salaries, the reduction there of certified salaries of $497,000. That portion there, as I'll get into the budget more, those reductions to certified salaries, we are putting some of that into ESSER where we can, but I just caution that when we did not, the board did not recommend putting positions into the ESSER account because we recognize that in the next 2 years, those ESSER funds are not available, and then that will then stand against the operational budget of the district. So we did do that in the short term because looking at $1 million reduction, we're able to do it elsewhere. Non-certified salaries, benefits, contractual services, transportation, dues and fees, and equipment. Supplies, we've held the schools at 0% increase in supplies the last 2 years. We are taking even a greater reduction in supplies, for that 53,700. So that is how we're coming up with the $1,040,000 of reductions. I'll get into a little bit more about those, but that gives a quick overview of what those positions are. The next is a budget summary. This is our summary page. I think this is a great reference to what each line is increasing. You can see that administrative salaries are decreasing -2.3%. Certified salaries increasing 2.2%. If I had the other executive summary with further reductions, you would see the increases are greater there, but with those reductions, they're all in the twos. Employee benefits, as you heard Roche say, that we're looking at 10% increase in insurance. That's something that's out of our control. Contractual services. Some of those services are systems that we deal with in the district, such as our parent information system, which is our school. Those increases are between 4% and 7%. We don't control those. To switch a system to try to go with a reduction for 1 year would be cost us more in manpower to switch that system. So that's the contractual service increases. Utilities, really we're at a modest 2.97% with inflation. We aren't concerned about that. The last 2 years with COVID have been anomalies as far as usage and the increases in fuel. So 2.97, transportation at 1.88%. Our contractual obligation with NBT is over 3%, but yet you see a 1.8% increase. We're hoping that there was additional funding in transportation for the past 2 years, but again, because of the COVID situation, we're not positive that's going to be the case, but we are hopeful. So you see only 1.8%. Tuitions at 4.83. Students who elect to go to a magnet school, which students have that right to go to a magnet school, those tuitions are anywhere between 4% and 7% increase for magnet schools. We're looking at 4.83% tuitions. We do not have any outplaced tuitions. What I mean by an outplacement is if a student is expelled from school, we are required by law to educate that student at the same level that they would be educated in Berlin Public Schools. That means that the district needs to find another school district or program to educate that student. We do not have funds in the budget for that at all. Also, if it is a special education student and that student needs outplacement in a different district, different school, whether it be a public or private, we need to fund that also by law. There are no funds in the budget for that at all. We used to keep 100,000 to 300,000 in that for potential out district placements. We do not have those in the budget at this time. Supplies and textbooks, you can see there's a decrease as compared to last year, and equipment at 22.16. I would like to say though, we have never had a technology plan, meaning that we never had a technology plan that adequately funded the technology that's needed by students. Students are in a one-to-one environment, meaning that we have one technology device. Typically it's a Chromebook or iPad for each student to use, and teachers also have a computer device in their room to use. We do not have the money budgeted within the budget to replace. Typically at the end of the year, any funds that we have, technology becomes a priority. And in this day and age, you cannot operate without that technology. So I just want to draw your attention to that equipment. So that's a quick overview of all the lines of the budget. Oftentimes it's talked about, well, enrollments decreasing. We use it's called the Prada report. We pay for a report that's done. And it's from the Prada report, we're looking at a net change projected minus 29 students. I just want to reiterate that 29 student decrease, that's across all buildings, as you can see. It does not mean that it's necessarily a teacher because we're losing over 20 students. We are reducing teachers. We are reducing 3 staff members, teaching staff members for next year, and we're reducing 0.4 FTE also. I'll get a little more into that. Administrators, oftentimes it's talked about how many administrators we have in the district. As I said, we are decreasing by 1 administrator next year, but we are adding a 0.2. So if you look at overall 0.8 net decrease with administrators, if you look back over since 2016-17, gives you a rough idea of the administrators that have been in the district over that time. Also, teacher comparison. Next year, based on the FTE cuts that I shared with you, we're reducing our FTE next year of our certified teaching staff. You know, roughly it's a 3.4 reduction in teaching staff. This page here, I won't spend much time on, but I don't want you to think that there were not requests for additional staff. This really shows the requests for additional staff. The lower portion, grant and other funded requests. The staff members that we're asking for next year, we're asking for an internship coordinator at the high school, career coordinator. That'll be funded through a grant. We're asking for a night armed security guard for the high school. The high school is open in the evening. We'd like to have someone there while the school is utilized. And the other position we're asking for is that 0.2 for HR, for the HR department. This slide here just reflects those positions that we're asking for. As I said, the one at the bottom, the learning coordinator internship, that's funded through the open choice grant. The town, Department 61, is the armed security guard. Then the 0.2 increase in HR will be funded in the operational budget. Contracted services. I spoke to that earlier. I know Roche touched on it also. Our insurance company, Kerma, which is the same as the town, is now requiring the district to enhance their cybersecurity software. So that's a really required purchase. And an increase in legal fees and anticipated copier contract. We're working on a new copier contract. So that would be the contractual services increase, as well as I spoke about the operational systems 3%. Transportation, I spoke of already. We're at 1.88, but yes, the contract with MBT is 3.45. So we're definitely taking into account that we believe that we might have had extra money in the transportation account this past year, but there is a concern because of the COVID and not dealing with a typical year. And we tend to use a portion of the excess cost funds to offset special education transportation. I think it's important for everyone to know that if a student requires education outside of town of Berlin, the transportation is still needed to be provided by Berlin. So that means if a student is required to go to a special school that's an hour away, and we do have students that do require this, Berlin still must pay for that transportation. So that student may take a van by themselves daily. So oftentimes the transportation rate could be close to what the education rate is for that student. Berlin is required to pay for both. I spoke to the first one. No funds have been budgeted for anticipated outplacements. Anticipated increase in correct school is 12% for some of the correct schools. And then you can see a breakdown of, and I won't spend time going through it, but you see a breakdown of the different outplaced public and private tuitions that we're currently paying and what we're anticipating for next year. But it is a lot, it is a tuition at $2,380,000 is a lot of money that's spent for tuition. Again, it goes back to why do we want to make the Berlin public schools as competitive as possible? We don't want students needing tuition outside of Berlin. We want to go provide everything they need here. So we're not taking your tax dollars and sending them out to it outside the schools that are being used here in town. All other expenditures, the district is taking 0% increase from the original 2011-21 budget on all other expenditures. The board approved $20,000 of transfer for the Griswold band room. Griswold hasn't had a band room. We're looking to use $20,000 to convert into the band room at Griswold. Initial request, the superintendent included additional $474 of $700,000 in equipment and facilities improvement, which was cut by the superintendent before. So that was cut by me before the January 10th meeting. Looking at things, the discussion with principals was coming with a budget that you believe from the year before. And anything you're asking additionally, you have to justify why that's needed. So none of the staff that the principals asked for have been increased. Their school budgets have been held at zero. So very limited to what the increases are for the district. Again, go back to the summary page. You've already seen that. And I just draw your attention to what the increases are, which to me shows a real conscious effort to hold things at a minimum for the Board of Education. It's been mentioned about the Eso grants. There were 2 Eso grants that the board received. I know the town also received funding, but I think it's important to have it documented to the public of where these funds are spent. So if you just read down the descriptions, extended learning opportunities for students, reading support at the middle school, effective ESS is effective school solution. We've had that at the high school. It's been a conversation piece with the budget every year. We did add that at the middle school. Common ground, a partnership with social services, which provides learning opportunities for students after school and socialization. Partially funded Zoom licenses. You know, we've used the Zoom licenses this year. I don't think the Zoom licenses are going away completely. We still use them for parent conferences. They're used for meetings. So we will need to continue with that. Maybe not the same level, but we will definitely continue that. And family communication specialist. Looking at, that's where the monies for the ESSER 2 are spent. What you see in red here are the changes. that we put in place based on the reduction in our budget. So when you add up 31,962, 10,000, and 60,000 there, we're using those funds now for a position in using the grant funds. The ESSER ARC, extending learning opportunities. Again, you can see reading support at the elementary school certified staff. We're going to now use some of the extended learning opportunities to pay for the reading support at the elementary school. But just to give you again the descriptions, mental health suite at McGee. So we're using funds to reconstruct a health suite at McGee to have the social workers, psychologists, school counselors together in a mental health suite for students. So those funds would typically be out of capital. We're going to use the ESSER funds to do that. Similar how Roche spoke about the town using the funds for potentially the HVAC at the elementary. You know, upgrading the current fiber network, again, it would be a capital expense. We're using ESSER funds to do these things. Install fiber to town hall, the data closets, Board of Ed. Again, ESSER funds, data switch centers. So I just think it's important to note that we are looking at the ESSER funds previously to do capital improvements and things that would normally be funded on the town, through the town as capital improvements. We are using the funds to do that, similar to what the town was planning to do. I want to spend a moment on Hartford Open Choice. We are part of the Open Choice program. It's often discussed of why and how. Typically, we have had 4%. You can look here, 3.4% of our student population has been Hartford Open Choice. We get to select what age group we take the students at. Meaning that we're not taking students just saying, well, you know, any grade level. The last 4 years, we've taken students at the K first grade level, and then we allowed that there were siblings that were in other grade levels. We had the option to accept them or not. When we take a student from Hartford, Hartford reimburses the district. They do not reimburse the district at the per pupil expenditure rate. They reimburse the different district at different thresholds depending on the percentage. If you're 4% or greater, they reimburse at $8,000 per student. You might say, well, but it's typically $18,000 to educate, so why are we taking 8? Because we're deciding where that student is placed. So if we're taking a student that's at K, we're not adding a new kindergarten classroom. We're taking that student to maybe 15 students, so now we're making 16 or 17. In that same classroom, we're already paying the teacher, but yet the district is receiving $16,000 for taking those 2 students. It's not all about the money, it's also about the opportunity providing for the students. But it is about when you look at why you're doing it if you're only taking 8,000. So I hope there's an understanding. We never would take students and then say, oh, we got to add additional teachers now to draw on further resources. If the student is determined to be special education and they need additional resources, whether it be a paraprofessional or they need an outplacement in another district, Hartford Public Schools picks up the cost. It does not go against Berlin Public Schools. So it's not as though I don't want people to think that, well, if you take these students and there's an issue, then it's a deficit to Berlin. That's not the case. My concern is many of the students this past year, students get to elect what district they want to go to. Berlin not being adjacent to Hartford. Most families hear about Berlin through other students who went through the Berlin Public Schools. Their families come back and say, Berlin was great for my student, you should try Berlin Public Schools. When that's the case, we often get above that 4%. Last year, because of COVID and the year before, they did not have any more students that were even opting for choice at the time. And we've lost many students because once they move out of Hartford, they're no longer eligible to be part of the choice program. My concern is right now, we have several students planning on leaving. Some planning to go from 8th, they're going to tech school, they're going to a magnet school, not going to Berlin High School, but also students that have withdrawn throughout the year. We're going to need at least 20 students to maintain that 4%. Our budget, we budgeted as though we're receiving the $8,000 for roughly 100 students. If that is reduced to 3%, and one year we had 3.98, state would allow it. But so if it's reduced, we would have a deficit of $200,000. The money is in choice. We used to have an abundance of money for choice, and I know that the Board of Finance knows this, the mayor knows. That money was used during COVID to purchase the Zoom system like you're using today that we had in every classroom. The monies in choice right now are tied up into positions. We have roughly $150,000 that's not already allocated in our budget for next year for choice. That's if we receive the full $8,000 per students. We have 4%. So that gives you a little bit about choice. This talks about, there's $159,000. You see it, it's in bold, the red or blue is across the bottom. That's what's unallocated for next year. The rest you can see is tied up in certified and non-certified positions are listed here. That's where the choice money is being spent. A little bit about our funding here. This gives a good picture of the last years of funding here, what we requested and what we received. The Board of Finance and the Town Council, 3.21%, 3.2%, 3.17%, and 2.5%. In conversations with the Board of Finance, still looking at the average of 2.5, 3.1, 3.2, 3.7. That still puts us right in the middle. In my position as superintendent for the last 4 years has been, we just need to stay where other towns are to be competitive. 1% was much less than what they're receiving. But where you've given us for the last 4 years has been excellent. So nice graph here, just shows Berlin. I know that Sal mentioned at the beginning, if you had the per pupil expenditures, I'll get to in a moment. But this just shows what budgets other towns have received and where Berlin is. And in years past, we were down at the lowest. These are not towns within our DIRG, which means our district reference group, which looks at the social economic placement of each town. These are just towns that typically Berlin is compared to based on proximity or based on just the town itself. So when looking at this, the 2.49, the 3-year average there, a 5-year average puts us right in the middle of a lot of towns, which is excellent. Per pupil, I didn't do just the towns that were there. I looked at all the towns that are in our reference group, and we're in the middle. I would say right in the middle of those towns. What our per pupil expenditure is, which is how the state breaks down what the town's actually paying per student to educate them. Another graph, it showed 5 years ago with that little 1% we were pulling away from the state average. In the last years, we're parallel to it. Not closing the gap to the state average, but definitely parallel to it. This was mentioned by Roche. I'll just mention it again. The town receives roughly, it's less than 6 million, I believe it's like 5.9 million. The educational cost share. That means that for the town having an education system, the state provides the town with almost $6 million. I think it's important just to note that that's part of the revenue that's given to the town for having the educational system. Sorry about that. Shared revenue sources that's been through, the 60-40 split or with the educational cost share, how that pie chart breaks out. Next slide, the operational funding, that just shows the educational cost share at 12.26% versus the total revenue there for the Board of Education operation. And to close up, I wanted to share a little bit about the board acting responsible, with the superintendent here. There's things that typically the town would fund under capital, paving, and such nature, things of that security equipment, phone systems. And I think we work well with the town and have the last few years when there's additional monies left at the end of the year. And there's oftentimes said, well, you have 2% extra, you have $400,000 extra. If you have a $50 million budget, to be in between 1% and 3%, they say that you're doing a good job managing the money. But when there is money left, oftentimes a portion of it's given back to the town. And then there's other things that we've had in the capital improvement list that haven't been funded in years that we look to prioritize. So I just listed out here some of those things that have been done with the end of year money. As I said, equipment, technology is always a priority, but the other piece that's a priority is things such as the blast classroom, which allows us, again, not to have to send students out of district, which is a greater expense. We renovated a classroom at McGee Middle School. They're refinishing the gym floors. The floors weren't refinished for over 10 years. We refinished gym floors. McGee Gym wasn't painted for over 30 years. We painted security equipment, the Hubbard fire alarms, McGee rooftop HVC unit, lighting in the library media center, paving a Willard playground, Hubbard classroom storage, removal of retaining walls and paving at McGee, additional funding for the rooftop HVC unit at McGee. Next page is 3-year funding of end of the year purchases. Willard and Hubbard camera system, video monitoring system, McGee camera system, staff laptops, iPad, MacBooks, adapters, vans, facility plan updates, equipment for McGee gym, painting equipment, boardroom remodel and furniture, new building signs. So I won't read the rest, but I think you can see they're not as though we're doing things that are not improvements to the district, things that the community would see as normal things that even in your own home that you would do in time that just are worn and don't give the appeal that they should for the town or for the district. So in closing, in my mind, the school district reflects the budget, the commitment of the community to invest in the future of our children. The erosion of funding for education challenges stability of Berlin as a competitive school district and rich educational and extracurricular opportunities for students. I think the other part that typically comes up this time in budget, and I thank the Board of Finance and the mayor that it's not been this contentious discussion back and forth. I think it's really been productive, is to talk about extracurricular and extra programs that are offered, including sports. As you can see with the suggestions this afternoon here, we're not looking and saying we're cutting sports, we're cutting extracurricular. We're looking at a few teaching positions, an administrative position, some supplies, some equipment, and kind of across the board. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Roche and Brian. At this time, we'll take questions. Any questions?
Should hold it down and then it will pop on with a green light.
Could you state your name and address, please?
Yeah, not above 85 Stevens Drive. So on debt, you expect to end at 74.6 million at the end of June. And then based on this budget in June 23, what do you expect that number to be? Bringing it down.
It'll be about 8 million lower than that number, assuming no additional borrowing.
Okay, and you'll decide on the additional borrowings throughout the year, is that?
It would be, yes. I mean, a lot of it will depend on the projects, potentially alternative funding sources. For example, there was a period of time, probably say 3 to 6, 7 years ago, where the town was borrowing for a number of road projects, borrowed a few $1 million to do road work. Since that time, Mike Ahern, Public Works Director, and his team have been working to secure lots of grants, which are pre-funded through the Capital Region Council of Governments and ultimately the state. And so we've been able to avoid some of that borrowing by use of state grants. We've been able to minimize the cost of bridge repairs and replacements because the state and or federal government, depending on the bridge, often reimburses at close to 50%. That's still 50% the town has to pay for, but it's 50% the town doesn't have to pay for. And then, of course, the big question is the $5 million that remains in ARPA funds that were provided to the municipality could be put to use to avoid the borrowing. So the projects are available. It's going to be largely the council, the Board of Finance deciding what to move forward on and the best way to fund it.
Yeah, we back a few years ago, we were over $100 million in debt. And for a town our size, our normal debt should be around $40 million. So that's the challenge that we're having. Just imagine if we get down to $40 million, we cut our debt payments, in half. Having $5 million a year to do whatever we want with would be tremendous for the town. But taking that aside, we do have some major projects that are coming forward. I mean, just to sustain, our facilities, what do we have, $300 million of facilities and buildings, okay? So we're gonna, we had a meeting a month ago that says we gotta put a new roof on, town hall, new roof on the library. So we do have some pretty substantial, capital projects. You're looking at annually maybe $5 to $8 million of capital projects. So we're gonna have to relook at our debt situation and maybe bond where we didn't want to bond, but still drop the debt, overall.
Follow up on that, though. About all your capital repairs and things that you mentioned, right? Say it's 5 to 8 million, but you have 5 million from the federal government still set aside.
Yeah, that's
That could help you. I know you're using a little bit.
Yeah, well,
just now.
sure.
To balance this budget again, so you still have 5 million aside, right?
Yeah, there's three schools that have HVAC upgrades. You're talking about 15 to 20 million. So we would use that first 5 million for the first school. To
Over the next few years.
Any other questions?
Hi, my name is June Daly, and I'm at 67 Preston, Berlin. And first, I'd like to reach out and just say thanks for everyone that's working so hard to keep the budget in line for the coming year. We've got the mayor, we've got our representative, Donna B, who's been looking for us to find out, make some of our goals possible. I know we've got the town financial leader, our finance board, and our town committee. All working really hard. So first, I wanted to say thank you. The only point I was looking at is I do appreciate that the school board came in with a certain percentage increase and we reduced that as a recommendation. And I want to thank our finance board for suggesting that change. I am still a little bit concerned for the cost per pupil or cost per student. I think Sal, you mentioned something about some of the area towns that we make comparisons to might be a good comparison model. And I see where Brian had provided his material. Many more school districts, but I'm kind of new to the area, but they look a lot closer to what, like the Long Island Sound area where the cost of living might be quite a bit higher. So I don't know if that's a full measure there. Brian, I just wanted to address you with my questions. What do you think about the cost per student? How do you think we're hanging in here?
I think you look at the district reference group based on the economic and social. If you look at the DIRG, which the state doesn't use as much anymore, but our DIRG, we've always been right in the middle, and that's where we are. I think another thing to look at is I didn't mention it, the wealth ranking of Berlin versus what we pay. So Berlin's ranked 60th out of 169 towns, but what we spend per pupil is ranked at 100 or 100. So oftentimes when we get into, I share this with the Board of Finance, we get into negotiations with teachers and things. That's how it's looked at. It's looked at the ability of the town to pay over what they can afford to pay based on that. So the per pupil expenditure, you're talking maybe a couple $100 either way. I don't think that's the only mark to look at. I think the other mark to look at is when you're looking at a 1% increase, the contractual obligations year to year are over 2%. So if you don't have at least 2, ours are over 3, then you start cutting staff. Right? As I said, 30 students is not really enough to start cutting staff. And we're making cuts already this year to several positions.
Yeah, this is Jude again for those online, and I appreciate your thank you for that. You talk about ability to pay, and I don't know where that comes in. I understand that. In recently moved to Berlin, I'm a retiree, and so my funds are limited. And I'm not sure if we know what the retirement counts are in our town, and how our increased rate of taxes impact us. I guess that's just one of my considerations as I look at the finances and think making those decisions, those tough decisions to keep that cost down for us.
No, I think when you look at the overall budget, as I said, we're reducing staff in the budget based on what's current staff that we have. We've reduced over the years because our student population. So we're constantly looking at other ways to reduce. But we're also want to stay competitive with for the students that do those school.
Any other questions? Thank you so much. Thank you so much for attending. I'll make a motion to adjourn. Thank you.